Hello, everyone. Uh, FEM 2020 is a series of conversations on women health issues. And now we are going to discuss something on obesity. Undoubtedly, obesity is a huge problem and it has been growing over last few decades consistently. There is no stoppage to it. That means that there are some very complicated drivers behind this epidemic. Because despite a lot of talk and lot of efforts at different levels, we are nowhere near to finding any solution to this complex problem, which is quickly rising up as one of the top reasons for mortality, if not talking about other factors. There are many different reasons why obesity has become a problem, and we are going to touch upon different aspects. So before that, I'll quickly introduce all the panelists which are here with us to talk about this complex web of disorders. Can we get the next slide? So we have Dr. Kavita Arora. She is co-founder and a psychiatrist, Children First Mental Health Institute. And she often reflects on how body image and the critical gaze on our own bodies is such a prevalent discourse in our social structures. And she is bringing that insight also in our obesity discussion. She often get taken aback by the complete awareness we have about the impact that our language and vocabulary produces inside others and us. So I agree completely, because this word is itself heavy with so many connotations, obesity, and how powerful the unspoken language of a once over is. Welcome, Dr. Kavita. Tina Khanna, she is a nutritionist, a diabetes educator, and besides trying to find answers for what is the perfect counseling technique to struggle-free relationship with food, determining disability inclusiveness in schools, in sensitizing teachers, that has been a personal interest to her. And what started as a professional choice to help family with obesity and diabetes has now become a quest to rebel against ideas of perfect size and glossy diet. She's annoyed with the fat shaming and obsession over dress size. Welcome, Tina. We would love to hear your inputs. Swarnima Bhattacharya is the founder of Thea Care, a women's health platform, and a curator of Femicon, India's first women's health festival. So she uses the word festival rather than a negative term for it. She's the impact officer for Global Shapers, New Delhi. She's associated with the Harvard Program for Asia International Relationships with the focus on women's health and a part of Dove's self-esteem project. Swarnima works primarily on femtech, feminist leadership and health research. Welcome, Swarnima.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.
Dr. Nandita Chakravarti, she's a physician, poet, marathon runner, and a bohemian traveler. After practicing as a physician for decades, she has moved towards preventive medicine, and she believes that health essentially includes physical, mental, and emotional well-being and more. She's committed to have conversations about mindful and healthy lifestyle through her entrepreneurial journey, conversations, and more. So we have an interesting panel today. I'll open the session by talking about, number one, how obesity is incontrovertibly an important public health global issue. There are many determinants of this obesity epidemic. We can divide them broadly into individual and environmental factors. These, of course, influence each other. So the individual or behavioral factors are strongly influenced by the environmental factors, and there are several environmental factors and several individual factors, and there is a complex web of issues. In fact, we can use that analogy of, I don't know, ऊन का गोला किसी ने अगर वो किया है, untangle करने का कोशिश किया है. So as kids we used to do that. So you have to be very careful on what thread you're going to pull, because it is known as something called wicked problem, because there are some intractable issues because of the interrelation and layered determinant pattern in obesity. So what I am going to talk about now is that during our conversations to people who come to us with obesity, which is of course influenced by how the public messaging is on obesity, we simplistically focus on individual factors as being responsible, or the only responsible, or the main responsible factors of obesity. We speak as if the individual has a choice. Of course, ultimately, the choice of what an individual is eating and how much he or she is exercising depends on the person. But if we go philosophically, there is one quote by a great philosopher. I don't pronounce the name very well, Schopenhauer, that we can do whatever we want, but we cannot want what we want. So we can do whatever we desire, but do we choose our desires? The free will concept, it's not just a philosophical concept, it is also a psychological concept of how the drivers of our choices are actually automatic. So going by that fast and slow thinking concept, a lot of things which we do are reflex or automatic, and the environmental cues play a major role in that. But that is not just all. It's not about eating and exercising alone. We understand that as people say that I eat less, I'm still gaining weight, and some people eat more and still do not gain weight. And till now, a lot of research has been focusing on genetics of obese people. But recently, there was a study in which the focus was on genetic study of slim people, how they are protected against obesity, and this was done in University of Cambridge. This is called STILL study into lean and thin subjects. And what it figured out, actually there were some genetic variants which were responsible for obesity, plus they found some new variants and they calculated a genetic risk score. And it was seen that healthy thin people are generally thin because they have a lower burden of genes that increases the person's chance of being obese or overweight. And it is not because they are morally superior. So there is a strong genetic component. Uh, Discussing specifically with reference to our country, there has been a lot of discussion on epigenetics of obesity and other chronic diseases. In countries which are low and middle income, like India, uh, there is a double burden of malnutrition. Obesity cannot be discussed in alone unless we discuss undernutrition also along with it, because both of these exist in our societies. And there is more and more data that inequality, higher the income inequality, higher the prevalence of obesity. So there is some logic behind it, not just in a community, in a single individual, both under and overnutrition can exist. And there is more scientific data on that. And the explanation, one of the example is the short and fat people we see around. So people are stunted, malnutrition, but increasing nutrition doesn't increase the height, but the weight of many Indians. So we have this short and fat phenotype, which is a reflection of the changing economic uh, profile of the society. So there is something called thrifty phenotype hypothesis behind it. It is that uh, our programming starts in the womb of the mother, in the as a fetus. So there is a critical period, window period, where lot of programming happens, and one of the important critical period is the fetal development. And if during that period there is food insecurity, if the mother is not well nourished and baby gets a signal of food insecurity, uh, the drivers are not towards growth and maintenance, but towards survival and reproduction. Because so this is uh, an ecological perspective of the whole obesity problem in India. So which means that the baby tends to store fat as a survival advantage. And again, in a strive to survive as a species, reproduction is kind of focused. So early puberty, gaining weight, especially visceral obesity, but remaining stunted because long-term growth and maintenance is not there. So lean muscle mass is going low. So when that baby, if born as low birth weight or a large, both are issues, but especially an underweight baby, when gets good nourishment later on, it doesn't actually change the programming because that critical window period has gone. So maternal nutrition and female nutrition cannot be it is not actually taken into focus when we talk about overweight, obesity, and chronic diseases in India. And it is an important perspective because the programming happens during that early period during pregnancy and lactation, the second important period. So that critical period extends to that early ages when, because breastfeeding has been associated with improvement on both under and over nutrition in a very balanced way. So that is again an area of where we should focus our efforts on, and not actually towards individual blames on a person who is already programmed differently epigenetically. There are genetic factors, and of course the environment is not helping us in improving the whole concept. There are hardly any efforts to change the environment of availability of high calorie food at the click of our fingers now. So Swiggy, Zomato, I mean, it's not even, the effort is as much as just clicking. We don't even need to do anything. We don't need to move from a sofa to eat a good like high calorie food actually. So from that introduction, I move on to Dr. Kavita to get her insights on this issue.
Hi, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Beena. It's sort of started off a lot of different thoughts in my mind, but I'll try and limit myself to a little bit more the psychological, maybe the psychosocial perspective of obesity. And I'd like to start with the word itself, the language that we use. So as soon as one says, for example, obesity, what happens in our minds? So all the viewers out there, or all of us, what does obesity mean to me when the word occurs? This person is obese. And often I find people answering, there's an image in the mind that gets created. And that image is of a person, either self or someone else. And that image has a certain shape. But I would say, let's look at another layer. What does that image mean? Why did that particular image get created for that person? And that defines what obesity would mean even before a patient walks in to a doctor, for that doctor, or for a mental health professional, or for a nutritionist. So I think what I'm saying is that there are two parts to this. One part is the acknowledgement that I may have a meaning for obesity, whether I am a treating professional, I am a client, or I am a bystander. Everyone has a social discourse about obesity and a meaning to them. Some of it is led by the dominant social narratives. Some of it is very personal. The acknowledgement that this is there is absent. We don't say that it is coming from my premise of obesity. We accept it as a universal truth. Obese means weak-willed. Obese, the person who's coming in will not be fit. The person who's coming in, and we have different such discourses. The person who is coming in is going to be moody. I've heard often people talk about these. And this is not about the person. So where does it locate itself? Where do these discourses come from? They are inside me. I will use them. And yet, it's not about the person in front of me. So I think this realization that there is so much underneath the tip of the iceberg that makes this iceberg. And that metaphor, that if you look at the tip of the iceberg and say that's what we've got to look at, then we are actually missing the point. And this brings me to often the hidden parts of certain things. So is obesity really a disorder? Is it an illness? Is it an attitude? Is it a social discourse? Is it all of the above? But when we treat it, where does the accountability lie? If it is really composed of all of this, how come the accountability is on a patient? How come they're alone? How come they have to treat themselves? How come they have to bear the burden of it? What about the capitalist society that says that increase the size of the food and make it more available, and nobody stops that? Where's the accountability? Why is the accountability on the individual? So in much of our discourse and language, even if we say this is a disorder, and this is not a social problem, this is not a social narrative, this is a disorder, this is a disease. Diseases are traditionally in the individual and need to be fixed by the individual and the treating physician. So I often object to many things being called disorders, because in itself that language has taken away the entire accountability and put it squarely on the shoulders of the person. And I think that dilutes the entire definition itself. And therefore, if we don't start with a good definition, I feel, how will we actually look at the problem in a more holistic way? So often what I find is that the mind-body duality that we've created as a story inside ourselves, we say the body image is equal to obesity. What the person looks like, what the weight is, what the BMI is obesity. That's the definition of it. Is that really true? What's happening in the mind of a person? So that brings me to, is there enough study on the causes and the implications and consequences of this condition where a person is obese? So the psychological causes. So what is the development? So often in psychiatric disorders or psychological problems, we look at it from a biopsychosocial model. So most of the other, and I'm sorry I'm taking the liberty to say this, but most of the other branches of medicine rely on objective data, quantifiable, because it is bodily data. It is something that you can measure, or you can actually do a blood test or certain investigations and say, I am quantifying this. However, in psychiatry and psychology, hardly anything is quantifiable in quite the same way. And therefore, this discipline has always looked at what else could be a framework in our lives. What is it that exists but is intangible? What is under that tip of the iceberg that we may not be able to quantify and see, but it certainly exists. And that part, I think we need a framework for. So I'll tell you one of the frameworks that often the mental health field uses, which is the biopsychosocial framework. So the bio part, I think often medicine addresses in a beautifully micro-detailed research sort of way. The psyche part is often unaddressed, and the social part is often absent. But if we want to make any changes of any sort, rather than just concentrating on bio, we have to look at, I think, the social factors as well as the psychological factors. What makes the psyche of a person, but also what brings in resilience. What actually causes a person to say, I would like to bounce back from this. Because both of them are important and both of them are drives inside anyone. So inside our psyche, there are always counter forces. There are drives that make you do something, and there are drives that make you do something else. And it is never one or the other. It's always that both exist. And this is no theory, this is from my experience clinically, that there is always, if we look hard enough, the implicit drive in someone who is walking into a clinic of a medical specialist, a nutritionist, a mental health professional, a well-being physician. What's the inherent drive in that person? Why would they expose themselves to the vulnerability that a once-over gives them? That a doctor who's sitting there, who is an expert in the eyes of society, can look me over and say something's wrong with you. I wouldn't do it. Why would they do it? What's the drive that helps them go to a nutritionist and say something is not something that I ought to be able to do? Because that's the social discourse. You ought to be able to control what you put in your mouth. That's the social discourse, unfortunately. And so if I'm not being able to control it, and I'm saying to someone else, you know what, this simple acts that everybody does 3 times a day, several times a day, several times a week, and we make it a developmental milestone. The child is able to eat at this age. They were able to chew at this age. It's a milestone. And if I go and tell someone, you know what, I can't control my milestone. I achieved it at 3, but now I can't control it. What do you think is driving that person? And why do we not focus on the resilience and the drive that this person aspires to be different, that they are struggling, that this is not a disease. This is something that this person is struggling with. And what are the various interfaces that they are struggling with? And here I want to bring in the psychological effects sometimes. The person is reaching us not for obesity. The person is reaching us because of how they have had to navigate the interface with all the various social structures around them. The person has had to navigate the observer, the critical gaze that they have had from their mother to their aunt to their dadi and their nani and anybody who visits, because in our culture, everyone owns the child. You can come in, you can pat the head, you can do the cheeks, and you can say, ये तो काली हो गई, ये तो मोटा हो गया, ये तो ऐसा है, अब तुम खा नहीं रही हो, तुम कमजोर हो गई हो. Everyone is allowed to comment. That's our culture. It's an inclusive culture, but also it brings about these discourses. So I'm not judging the culture. I'm just saying this is our reality. We all grow up like this, and some of them are beautiful discourses about us. But there are also sometimes we don't even understand the impact of some of these discourses. And this includes the observer. This is not about the client. This is not about the person. It is about the environment around them that is observing the gaze inside my head, which says, even if I am. So why do so many people say that we hide and eat? Who are they hiding from? When you sit in a restaurant, you don't go around observing everybody else, how they eat. What do you need to hide from when you're eating? Whose gaze is it? And this is such an internalized gaze that often they find. Children have the internalized gaze. It's not even adults. At 11, they have an internalized gaze. At 10, they have an internalized gaze that says, ये नहीं खाना होता है, मम्मी को नहीं पता चलना चाहिए कि ये खा लिया मैंने. It's not even about obesity at that point in time. They may not have reached that place of physically looking, but this gaze exists. And how we present this gaze to children is what their story becomes, about weight, about eating, about body image. So I do not see necessarily obesity only. I see that body image itself is such a constricted set of rules that society has created. Your weight should be between this and this. And this is not health, although it is often talked about as health. So a parent will say it to the child and say, aapki health ke liye keh rahe hain. We are talking to you because the nutrition that you're taking is very important. And yes, partly it's about that. But there is always an underlying thing, you will go fat. Or you will not be the right weight. And the body image. So how does the observer usually figure that out? They look. They give you a once over. Are you increasing in weight or not? The machine comes later. I look at you and I figure it out. And I think I know. But what are you figuring out? So I think those are the questions that I often ask myself. The acknowledgement of this social narrative and how I hold it, and the possible bias that it creates for a kind of body image, for a kind of weight, for a kind of personality that I associate in my head with either more weight or less weight. So I also work with eating disorders where there's so much restriction, so much control that they're malnourished, they're undernourished. The problem is not in the provision of food. The malnourishment is not coming from lack of access to food. The problem is coming from the sense of what ought to be my body image. What in my head is the story, the notional story of control over this act of eating. And it may lead to a severely malnourished person, but the body image remains intact. And what am I trying to achieve here? Similarly, in people who are obese, what are they trying to really achieve? How many of them are saying, I want to be healthy? And how many of them are saying, I actually do not like who I am. I don't like my obesity. And I think these are some of the things that we often forget because they are possibly coming from our own social discourse and internalized bias and stories that we have. So I have not met a single person. So so the recent trend about many in the social media where people who are obese, who look fat, have come online and said, I like who I am. And there are so many Insta handles, so many social media profiles now which say, I like who I am. I'm fit, I'm healthy, I like who I am. Why have they needed to say it? Why is there such less discourse? Why is this equal to a fight? Why is this activism? Because of the restricted way that we actually think that we are. They don't like it. Why do they have to state I like myself? And I think those are some of the things that psychologically I feel we take away, we don't address often. This conversation, this discourse, even in a mental health, so if I sit across someone, it's difficult to bring that up because it has created so many wounds. It is so raw inside the person. But also, like Beena, you said in the beginning, it's such a wound up wool set that you don't know what you will pull and which string will come out and which one will go back. And often I find mental health professionals, medical professionals will not address this part because they're afraid to go wrong, because they don't know what language to use. Often they don't know, if I bring this up, will this person dip? Will they become lower in mood? Will I lower their motivation? Should I stick to hard facts? So I think there is also this difficulty in the observer to overcome and bridge the gap where you're connecting to the psyche of the individual, where you're connecting to the social part of the individual, and not just remaining with the biogenetic and the medical part. So I think the compartmentalization is what I'm talking about, the sort of fragmentation in our society about some of these stories, and the attempt to bring it all together, make it more cohesive, is possibly going to help us overall in terms of going forward. There are certain studies, and I'm just going to speak about that for 2 minutes. So I've talked about the observer. I'm talking about now the self or the person. What does body image mean to them themselves? What does weight mean to them themselves? And that part of who am I in the context of what I eat, how much I weigh, what I look like. And this is quite apart from the observer. But there is a gaze inside me, even if I'm sitting on my own, and if I'm eating something, I already have a gaze inside me, even if nobody else is watching me. That is an other gaze. So I'm watching myself eat, and I'm judging myself for it. And yet there's a part of me that wants to eat it. And this is the fight or the constant conflict. And part of it is again coming from the world's discourse on body image, which I have internalized. But I'm not aware that that is not a universal truth, because I accept it, and the observer and the witness and everybody around me also accepts it as a universal truth. So how can I counter that? So a lot of the mental health, the wellness, the nutritionist work often combines to address this part. But the acknowledgement and accountability, as I've said earlier, I think is still something that we have to arrive at. We don't manage to. There are certain studies that talk about how weight and people who are obese or who have been declared obese do have a larger prevalence as a result. So the effect, as a result, they may have a larger prevalence of mood disorders, anxiety, social anxiety, and impulse control issues. But this is not necessarily a study done on the prevalence, like you said, across population. So the studies still don't determine whether it is the obesity itself which is leading to these effects, or is it that there is something else underlying where obesity is also a manifest? Because the obesity is an end result of several other factors going on, whether it's genetic, whether it's psychological, whether it's social. But when we unravel and when we actually try to deconstruct the obesity, what all do we need to address? And I do think that psychological as well as mental health issues are a large part of the construct of the concept in the mind of the treating physician, in the mind of the client, and in social discourses. And unless we address that, we're probably not looking at the problem in a defined way or in a holistic way. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kavita. Thank you, Dr. Beena. It was so wonderful listening to all of you. And I absolutely agree with what Dr. Kavita says and what Dr. Beena says. As a nutritionist, I always believe that what I can't do for myself, I cannot expect the other person to do. So if I am fighting my weight, knowing all the know-hows of what the ideal weight should be, what the ideal eating pattern should be, why am I unable to do it? So when I say why, I come to what Dr. Beena Bansal says. Genetics plays a big role. Yet, I also agree with what Dr. Kavita says, that there's a gaze behind me which is watching me all the time. It plays on my mood. So I've dealt with this chaos for a couple of years, and that is a good thing, I would say, because it changes my outlook towards how I counsel women who come to my clinic saying that I need to lose weight. So I see women across ages, across different financial curves of the graph. And what I see is there's one common point that Dr. Kavita mentioned, that they're constantly battling with their emotions. It's not what they're eating, it's not what's on the plate. It's always this constant battle about ye sahi nahi hai. Gluten is not right for me. Am I not getting the five fruits in the day? So I feel, as a nutritionist, yes, there's a lot of wrong information, a lot of false information, a lot of glossy picturization about what ideally we should be eating, what helps the weight, what doesn't help the weight. Having said that, um, the objective of our conversation was today empowering women to deal with obesity. How do we do it? Let's come to that. How do we do it? So, if you were to ask me as a nutritionist, how would I do it? I would make sure that nutritionists, psychologists, um, medical health practitioners, we make sure that we give out the right communication, the right information to our women who come and visit our clinic. We make sure that we work towards social media platforms, multimedia platforms that are bringing out communication which is wrong. So we give out the right information. When a woman walks into our clinic, it should not be about the scales. If she has diabetes or if her lipid profiles are not right, it should not be about her weight. It should not be about what she's eating. It should be about how did you how did it happen. If there's diabetes, we should be able to acknowledge the fact, how did it happen. Okay, and she should accept it, that this is why I have diabetes, this is why I have my lipid profiles are deranged, and we work towards it. So the communication should be right. When we talk about empowering women to deal with obesity, I feel that we're also helping them bring out a generation of individuals, because a woman, she's going to be a mother, right? So if she's fit in mind, body, soul, she brings out the perfect generation. So I feel that a mother should be, or a lady, even an adolescent, should be attended to with the right communication when she visits the clinic. Adolescent healthcare should be, attended to with the right image, that okay, it's not about the weight, it's not about a certain body size. Go ahead, work out because it's good for your bone mass. Go ahead, work out because it's good to strengthen your muscle, and a good toned up body would help you um, uh, feel good. So it's about giving out the right information is what I say as a nutritionist. Dr. Beena mentioned about how epigenetics and genetics plays a big role in your nutrition, and if there's a baby in the womb and is malnourished, it really impacts the way it grows up. So I share my personal experience here. I would like to add a simple experience. Me being a nutritionist, I know what is good for me. I knew what was good for me when I was pregnant. Yet I had this episode of nausea, extreme nausea, for about 8 months during my pregnancy where I couldn't hold up to food and water. So I would throw up 18 times in a day, and this carried on till the 8th month. So I couldn't eat anything, and the doctor would continuously say that probably you have a very small baby. We're not sure whether you'll have a baby with an ideal body weight. So being a nutritionist, I knew that I have to eat right. I have to eat for the two of us, yet I was unable to do it. So that's a situation that came up. I couldn't eat right. Now I have a child who's 14-year-old. It's not that I was not working on my child's nutrition when she grew up. I have a child who is a sensitive, picky eater. She's an extreme picky eater. I, as a nutritionist, have to take her around to different counselors so that she's able to actually eat more than 3 wholesome meals in a day. So what I'm trying to say is that genetics plays a role while you you're pregnant. Environment plays a role, situations play a role. We have to acknowledge the fact that a woman who walks into our clinic is struggling with more issues than the weight. Where is the weight coming from? There could be more issues. So having said that, I acknowledge and I agree with what Dr. Kavita says, that communication has to be right. We have to work on mental health. Nutritionists have a big role here. They have to be the mediator between the medical expert, between the psychologist, and the patient, and they have to bring out the right message across to the individual without making them feel overwhelmed with the whole idea of, I have to lose weight, I have to be eating right. So it's about nutrition density and not about calorie restriction. For now, I would like to just sum it up here. I would love to listen to other panel members, and then I'll probably add more if I have to. So to Dr. Nandita, I would like you to hear from you what you have to say about mindful eating and wellness coaching.
Very good morning to all of you. After listening to all of you, especially Kavita, I think I'm not going to speak what I wrote, because she's actually covered most of what I wanted to say. And it was so beautifully put that I can say that the power of language and the words which she was trying to say is what we felt. And more than applause, the silence and how she left, how it was empowering for us who are actually working in this field. And I'm so excited how it will fall on the audience who are who would love to get this. So a little bit about my journey as a wellness coach. I've been a practicing physician for decades, and I realized that when a patient walks into my clinic, whether it's with fever or indigestion or diabetes or blood pressure or anything else, even if it's just a flu, I always felt there is something more to it than just a symptom. And as doctors, we have been trained to treat, but we have also been trained to look, to listen, to empathize, to understand, right? So I felt that it's the duty and responsibility of a doctor to work on something beyond just what we can see as a symptom. The word doctor means teacher, and I think it's a very, very important role a doctor has to play to talk about awareness and to talk about something which leaves the patient feeling empowered. So with this in mind, I started to talk to my patients beyond the symptoms with which they would come. And through that, Conversation and More was born. That's the company I launched. These conversations led to dialogues, they led to exchange of views, they led to discussions. And then as we kept on doing these conversations, it opened a new concept for me, which was wellness. Now, any patient who walks into me, I see it as an opportunity to put my foot on the door and start talking about wellness. And especially if she's a woman, then, and if you can empower a woman, then she can be a natural coach for their family, especially children. So wellness is defined as an active process of becoming aware, making choices towards healthy and fulfilling life. But the point here is that it's a dynamic process. It's a dynamic process of change and growth mindset. And it should be pursued as a goal by everyone. As Kavita just mentioned, there has to be an element of kindness, because when we start pursuing these kind of goals, we are very vulnerable. We cannot do these kind of changes, we cannot pursue such goals feeling something is wrong. You cannot start on that foot that something is wrong with me, the way I look, something is wrong with me, what I eat, something is wrong with the way I've been told food is, nutrition is, and I have to correct. So then this whole concept, this relationship of you are wrong and I'm going to correct you, is starting the whole journey on the wrong foot. Because when a patient is sitting or when a client is sitting for coaching, they are so vulnerable that the first lesson I learned as a coach was to be kind. Because if you're not able to understand, empathize with the vulnerability, with opening up about such vulnerable issues about food, about choices of food, I'm going back to what Kavita said so many times, because she actually put it so beautifully in the words that the image which people have makes them so vulnerable that it's very difficult to even make yourself heard, because they're actually hiding behind this whole thing that something is wrong, I'm wrong. So once you start, whenever I start the coaching, my first step is always to, So whenever I start coaching, my first step is always to deal with this point that it's okay. Who you are and where you are, it's okay. There's no perfect picture where you have to walk into, right? We are not the entertainment industry. So it's okay. Secondly, once you take this first step that it's okay, then you can actually deal with the more important issues, which is what part of you is something you are looking at to work on. It's like I have 5 subjects in 12th grade and I'm okay with maths and physics, and chemistry needs a little more help. So I'm ready to work on chemistry. Similarly, which part of your life is something in which you want to work on? So when I ask them to write a food journal and come to me, it's not about saying that why did you have biscuit with tea or why did you have that sweet cold coffee. It's not about pointing out that. It's about seeing that what are you doing to yourself? Are you okay with that? Or is it opening up a window? Is it opening up a conversation that once I wrote the journal, I realized I don't want to eat this, but I eat it because it's too much of work to do something separately for me. Maybe that is the only conversation you need to make, to make the person somehow walk towards self-love so that you are okay to work a little hard on what you want to do. It's not about changing the diet. It's about understanding where the person wants to work, not where I want to work on the person. It's not that I, as a coach, want my client to work on changing the proportion of carbohydrates or changing the time of dinner. It's not where I think I should be working on. It is about where the person thinks he wants to work. Because unless you can hit that point, that sweet spot where the person wants to work on, you can never work on a growth mindset. You can never empower the person to work on resilience. And unless you do work on these 2 things, the grit will not come and the result will not come. We'll just keep on going around and feel more and more frustrated around it. So the wellness journey took me to different dimensions: mental, emotional, physical, relationship, financial, and I saw a pattern that everything worked the same way. Somebody who did not have time to cook for themselves did not have time to invest when they got the money, did not have time to have a conversation when it was important. So if you have if you are being a procrastinator, or if you're just trying to be lazy about something, it will show in everything. So you don't need to be on a wellness coach for this or wellness coach for that. You just have to again work on one sweet spot, which the person himself feels is pulling him down. And it's been a beautiful journey. Every patient and every client, although it looks like I'm coaching them, but it's been a journey for me to grow and learn with every client. With every client and every patient, I have become kinder, and my life has become more grounded, because it's been such a beautiful learning process that in the last 5 years where I've worked as a coach, I feel I'm the person who's gained the most in this journey, because I've learned so much, because everybody is so much full of knowledge and so much full of insights, which we, as Kavita said, we just look at what we have been conditioned to look at, and everybody opens up a new chapter. I'll come back to it more after we listen to Swarnima.
Hi again, everyone. Thank you so much for everyone who spoke before. It was such a wonderful thing to really think about obesity and being fat, basically, from different perspectives. I run Thea Care, which is health coaching and consultation platform for women, and our perspective is mostly to bridge the gender gap in access to healthcare and also in medical research. And I think something that a lot of people have said today is about the lack of evidence-based approach when it comes to dealing with female health issues. And this is something that we also see when it comes to obesity, that we are always we have to in fact look at health from a gendered perspective, and rather a more inclusive perspective. When I say gendered, I don't just mean women, I also mean trans people, and even gender has so many categories. So I think when we're talking about female obesity, I can't help but I'll keep it short. It's just a few thoughts and some data that I came across, and I thought it'll be something that we can collectively think about, because these are some important markers in the way when we're talking about society, when we're talking about the medical fraternity, when we're talking about ourselves and the way we're internalizing what it means to be fat, or what it means to be obese, or what it means to lose weight. So the thing is that we cannot speak about obesity or female health without talking about the culture within which women exist. And we all know that, what that culture is, whether it is in our country, in India, in South Asia, or the world in general. So when we're talking about female health, it is, all health outcomes for women are actually defined by a lack of culture of care around women, in the sense that when we're talking about obesity, when we're talking about health issues, when we're talking about investigating the reasons for obesity, there is a culture which does not invest entirely in women's health, and because it does not invest in empowering them, and that's why a lot of health issues go unnoticed. There's Nandita over here who is a wellness coach, and I'm sure she will attest to a lot of these. I know that a lot of people use these things very loosely, but there are actually now evidences and studies that talk about holding trauma in your body and what that actually does to you physically. And there is what holding stress to your body, what does chronic stress do to your body, etc. And there are a lot of studies that now provide a linkage between weight issues and holding trauma, weight issues and intergenerational trauma, etc. So these are a lot of things that people dismiss as, spiritual hokum and things like that. And yes, there is no doubt that there are a lot of people who, just like say these things in a random way. But, there's now evidence that, actually looks at what really holding stress does to your body, does to your muscles, does to your cells, and how that is related to weight issues of different kinds. So the phrase that I like to use time and time again is called culture of care, which is remarkably absent when it comes to female health issues in any way. Now, when we're talking about obesity, especially in women, we all do know that it's a public health issue. We all know that, obesity is something that has been framed as, something that costs the taxpayers' money. It is a weight on the healthcare resources. It is something that policy needs to be framed on. It is something that pharma is working, etc., etc. But as a public health professional, it behooves me to also share and admit that public health policy is shaped so much by culture and by the confluence of culture and and capital. Social-cultural factors and capital factors, economic factors, these are things that actually shape public health policies. Public health policies do not exist by their own merit. It is because of this that there are so many pervasive myths about breakfast cereal going on for years after years, in a certain culture. Whereas now, in fact, I shouldn't say now there is a lot of research. There has always been research about, right from your 1940s and 50s and 60s, that, what breakfast cereal does to, your blood sugar levels early in the morning. So it's incorrect to say that now there is a lot of research. There has always been a lot of research. But then the same also went for, something like a driving seat, research for, a seat belt in a car, that always existed. But, it became a part of public health discourse. It became a part of safety discourse much later, when the culture and the impetus was right. So when we're talking about sensitive issues, sensitive socio-cultural issues like obesity and public health issues like obesity, it is very important to understand that public health measures do not get established by the merit of their own research. There are various other factors which are mostly capitalist in nature, but also defined by a culture that really influence what public health measures are currently coming into place. And whenever we talk about public health, we really never speak of female health from a public health perspective. Whether it is menstruation, menstrual health, this and that, we are still in that framework of society where we look at female health from a women's issues perspective, a hush-hush perspective. It is not given the space, in public health the way it should be. We always speak of female health and female weight, etc., from the perspective of maternal health and child health, etc. And the personhood of women is something that is very mired in what a woman's role is. So when we talk about the impetus of female health and female weight, I would like for us to reflect that what has been the function of female health in our society, over time. It is now that there are, a lot of wellness coaches, women are, talking about health for health's sake, but that has not always been the case at all. When we're talking about female health, it has been lose your weight for marriage, or be healthy enough to reproduce. Actually, even now this is the case to a very great extent. It's just that there are alternative voices that are coming into a society, but still it is privilege of a few. It is not a mindset that has percolated. So when we're looking at female health, or women's weight, women's bodies, women's shape, all of that, we have to acknowledge that somehow we are looking at force-fitting it into a socio-cultural role that women's health and bodies are playing. And that is an unfortunate fact, which is something that women have to be aware of, and every kind of healthcare practitioner has to be aware of, and public health policy practitioners also need to be aware of, that we take the impetus of female health, female weight, female BMI, nutrition, etc., away from the impetus of just reproduction and marriage and the socio-cultural role it plays, but actually health for health's sake. this is an attitude that has still not been attached to, women's health at a socio-cultural level, and therefore not at a, medical level. I was talking to Beena ji in the beginning where, I was sharing that there are so many people in our community, so many doctors in our community who say that, we would love to talk to patients, but they come with their mothers or they come with their mothers-in-law, and they will, simply just ask about pregnancy and fertility, and the conversation just, totally gets sidetracked. There are so many doctors who tell us that they have to spend so much time in their fertility clinics trying to tell the husbands to lose weight, trying to tell the husbands, to focus on male fertility, because it is just something that it is a difficult conversation that doctors as well as women and society is having. So, I think, Kavita spoke about the internalized gaze, and she spoke about how we're talking. So, there was this research that was done by the University of Central Florida, and it has a very interesting name called "Am I Too Fat to Be a Princess?" Examining the effects of popular children's media on preschool, preschool body image. This is the name of the study, and this study found that nearly half of 3 to 6 year old girls say that they worry about being fat. 3 to 6 years old, just imagine, 3 years old. And this is in the US, obviously. But I mean, we can extrapolate it in our society also. And these days with the pervasiveness of social media, with the pervasiveness of digital media, we are internalizing social, imagery about our body even faster. For instance, who can be a princess? We've not really seen a fat princess, So, there was, speaking of, internalized gazes, and speaking of, the kind of impetus we provide to people who are obese and the kind of lack of care that's provided. Another, data is that, data according to the American Journal of Public Health, it says that the chances of a woman classified as obese achieving normal weight is 0.8%. So when a woman has internalized that she is obese or she's overweight or she's fat or whatever, then chances of her regaining her normal weight is so slim. And it behooves us to think that why that is the case. If it really were as simple as diets, if it really were as simple as a certain kind of exercise, then why does it become so difficult? This is something that, I think we all know the answer to, but we really have to sort of, drill deeper. And, then coming to the question of diets, there is a lot of evidence that is now showing that diets in and of themselves do not have the kind of impact on weight loss that they are marketed to be. Today, if you go on Instagram and you look at health or whatever, actually not just, Instagram, if you just, go and Google type this thing called women's health, just Google women's health and click on images. You will see the kind of images that are there. You will see images of, really slim women, women with abs, etc., etc. We have already equated health with being slim and health with, not, but data has shown that that is not true. Data has shown that, weight has, definitely, when somebody is fat, there's no doubt that there are health complications. But the problem is that when we are associating being fat or obese or overweight as a value judgment and the only determinant of health, there's a lot of data now about the lean unhealthy, the people who are lean but are also metabolically not healthy. And there are also various researchers that are showing that weight is not the only indicator of health. There are indicators of health such as, your grip strength, your, and other such things, which are like bigger or, equally important markers of health. But somehow when we're talking about obesity being the weight issue is not just a health issue. It has been used in the garb of a health issue. It has become a moral issue. And I think that is where we really need to think why and how that is the case when the research is consistently showing otherwise. The research is consistently showing otherwise, that diets in and of itself are not helping. In fact, there's such a lot of research about, how according to, like since 1959, research has shown that 95 to 98% of attempts to lose weight fail, and 2/3 of dieters actually gain back more than they have lost. These are researches that have existed since 1959. As early as 1969, research has shown that losing just 3% of your body weight resulted in 17% slowdown in metabolism. So actually, keeping weight off through random diets without a holistic intervention, without a proper investigation into what exactly is happening in your body and just doing a diet, this actually means fighting the body's energy regulation system. And these are things a lot of people are not talking about, where we're looking at diet as a part of health, where we're looking at weight loss as a part of a larger conversation around well-being, wellness, etc. Now, when we're talking about these things, obviously the gendered aspect is so important. Now, just, I'm just putting some trigger warnings here, because there is now a lot of research that shows that how, when it especially comes to women, fat is not just a health issue, fat is not just a body issue. There is repeated, evidence of medical stigma. There is, of course, fetishization in the pornography industry. There is caricaturization. And there is also a lot of data that now shows that fat women or overweight women who are survivors of sexual abuse or victims of sexual abuse are more likely to be blamed or more likely for their cases to be dismissed. There is now, this is not just, it used to begin as anecdotal evidence, but now there is actually research that shows this has been done by Harvard University, Columbia University, the Ohio State universities. There are various universities that are now collecting evidence that, there is a stigma, the stigmatization of a woman being fat, even when judicial processes are going on as a result of sexual abuse. Similarly, 89% of obese adults have been bullied by their romantic partners. 89% of obese adults have been bullied by their romantic partners, and most of them happen to be women. So I just cannot help but speak about weight issues over here, not just in terms of obesity, but also in terms of eating disorders. A lot of obesity is also as a result of eating disorders. A lot of the other spectrum of obesity and weight gain is also as a result of eating disorders. And eating disorders, as we now know, has so much more to do with our mental and psychological health rather than what we're actually putting on our plate and putting on our mouth. So I think when we are looking at things like what it means to be fat, what it means to be obese, what it means to lose weight. Does weight loss mean only losing the weight? When a woman says that, I want to lose weight, is it really, does she really just want to lose the weight? What is she wanting to lose? And what is she wanting to gain? For instance, this has such a huge impact on female health outcomes. There are women with PCOS, which is one of the most pervasive, hormonal and menstrual disorders in the country and in the world today, with an incidence of at least 1 in 10 women worldwide. And PCOD, as we all know, it leads to a lot of, weight loss, weight gain. But whenever we are looking at interventions for PCOS, most of the women are asking, how do I lose my acne and how do I lose my weight? Whereas, weight is just a very, very, very small component of PCOS. Weight and PCOS is actually now called as a metabolic disorder more than just, it is often now called as the younger sister of diabetes, because it has so much to do with, insulin and, sugar, etc. and not just know your weight. But people, whenever we talk about women's health issues, people say that, if you lose weight, you'll be fine. When it is about infertility, you're like, okay, you come down to a certain BMI level and you'll be fine. But that is not true. Research, medical practitioners, we all know that is not true. So the same also happens with menopause, especially in a country like India, where, it's like अच्छा अब तो अब तो तुम्हारा they say things like these, अब तो like your job is done, अब तो तुम्हारा बुढ़ापा आ गया है, whatever it is. It's okay if you're gaining a little bit of weight, or there is an invisibilization of women above a certain age. When they're trying to look better, feel better, access better healthcare, access better mental health care, people wonder, isko itna kya ho gaya, like why is she like, what is all this fuss all about? Apna tum, like slide into old age or slide into old age, with grace, as they say. And there are so many people, especially in India, who gain a lot of weight during menopause, who gain, like in the central part of their body. And it is all hormonal, but we never really talk about it. So when we are talking about obesity, when we are talking about weight, I think to summarize what one must try to say is that we must situate the role of weight and the role of body image and the role of what a woman should look like firmly into what society wants a woman to look and why. And secondly, why is there no culture of care that looks at evidence-based approaches towards losing weight, that that questions those approaches of medical intervention which are not backed by evidence, which are not backed by research? Why is that still not happening? And what are the real tangible healthcare outcomes of this approach to weight loss? It is definitely mental, it is definitely psychological, but it is actually tangibly, like, it actually tangibly has impacts on your body as well. I think this is where I would like to conclude. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Swarnima. After listening to all of it, I think I'll try and put all that intangible thing into some tangible measures, because that is what the second round is about, that what message are we giving to the people who listen to it. As a practitioner, if someone with obesity comes to me, I understand that there is a medical or biological connotation and there is a whole social stigma associated with it. So what can we practically do at our level? We understand the complexity of the problem and that solutions are not easy. So I will break it up into different things. Number one, as Swarnima rightly pointed out, on one hand, we are saying that please accept the way you are, and we are not denying that. Even medical practitioners have to take that stand and not focus on the end result. It shouldn't be the counseling for a person who walks in with a higher BMI shouldn't be about we are going to lose so much weight in so many days. It is about what we are going to do to work on a healthy lifestyle. The focus should always be on the lifestyle and diet and exercise, because as she rightly said, there is data and that if we divide population into different BMIs, at each BMI, it's the level of activity and what you're eating which influences health, not just BMI. Okay, so secondly, it is easy to gain weight because our bodies are designed to gain weight. It is very, very difficult to gain weight because the bodies don't allow that. We are evolutionary designed like that. So as a medical practitioner, we have to understand that, number one. Second, it is our responsibility not to increase these obesity bias and weight bias kind of discourses, at least in our clinics. So it starts somewhere. The entertainment industry, which Nandita mentioned, the thing starts there. The portrayal of women in even kids' stories, for example. And I'm glad that there are some stories, some interesting things coming out, like Dam Laga Ke Haisha. What a beautiful movie it was on not stigmatizing weight. And there are but there are really few things in social media or in public discourses. It is sad to see an adolescent girl walking in who is not responsible for her weight. She has a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, that is the common age, who walks in my clinic. The mother being worried so much about the appearance of her being obese. The girl is not bothered that much at that age. I know that those things start early, but this is the time to intervene. That is the time when still some change can be effected by communicating the right message, by telling the girl that don't allow anyone to tell you what you should or should not be doing, how much you should weigh. So that starts the conversation with the younger. At a 12-year-old, when maybe I'm the first interaction, but when a 20-year-old comes after visiting many doctors, she's already carrying all that trauma in her mind and body, as Swarnima pointed out. Uh, the, also from medical practitioners, there are data that they feel really targeted, they feel disrespected. Their experiences of disrespect, of embarrassment after being weighed in the clinics by the paramedical staff, it starts there. Someone who is weighing them on the weighing scale, someone who is talking them or judging them as they walk in. So we have to change that. We create a network of influence by empowering each of these individuals. I leave it at that, and I pass it on to Tina, who can then talk about how we talk about mindful eating. That doesn't mean that we stray away from advising about what is healthy eating and healthy activity. And if they are doing it, we appreciate for them those processes, telling them that weight doesn't matter. You don't need to care about that. It's what you're eating, what you're doing, and even that is not in our control. Change your micro environment, even if you can't change your basic environment. So this is an ongoing conversation about health, which we do not leave, because as a practitioners, we are supposed to do that, but not stigmatizing weight, because those who are stigmatized will lose less. They will not come to your clinic. Many obese women would shy away. In fact, that there is a study that 80% of obese women, those who need care, would shy away even for things unrelated to their obesity. They have something else. There is a woman who said, I can't go for walk because I feel shy because I'm obese, and if I walk, people watch me. So those things we have to remember. How does she start that process of healthy walking if she is not? There is a girl who said that my cousin, she is not going out to any parties because she's waiting for a weight to come down before she can present herself to society as what she's expected to present as. So I'll stop at that because the discussion will just keep on going on.
Thank you, Dr. Veena, and for passing the mic from one moti to another moti. But I think this is not allowed. That's fat shaming, and this is what we're going to stop. But I take it in a good humor. There's nothing wrong by. I mean, चश्मिश भी बोलते हैं लोग. It's okay, so it's fine. And yes, you're right. It starts because you're a doctor. I'm a nutritionist. So we're going to speak with that perspective. It starts with our clinic. I guess if we get the message right from our clinics, we make sure that any women, I'm not being gender biased here, it's about men as well, it's about boys and girls as well, but because this is a platform for women, I speak for women now, that when any lady, young, old, adolescent, menopausal, pregnant, lactating, we should not look at her with a certain way. We should look beyond her scales. When she walks in, there should be an empathetic attitude towards why she is here. What is it in her file? There's more to that file than biomedical parameters. There's more to her file than the clinical story. There's more to her life than her weighing scale. So I think as practitioners of health, Dr. Nandita as a wellness coach, Swarnima as a public health educator, I think it's very important for us to get our communications right to the individual across the table in our small setups, in our large setups, that it's more than the weight. And how does that communication happen? I think it's very important that we probe into their individual stories. Everybody has a story. I have a story. Everybody has a story. So we probe into individual stories. We do not generalize them because of their BMI. We try to help them in their capacity. Having said that, mental health has to be looked upon and has to be accommodated in our medical as well as nutritional coaching. Wellness coaches, nutritionists, I think are mediators for doctors, for mental health experts, and we need to as ourselves get it right in our communications, that there's more to eating. So when Dr. Veena asked me to talk about mindful eating, I'll share with my experience. So when I help women with their wellness coaching, when I help women with their weight, I do not ask them to measure themselves every week. I don't do that, because I know personally it takes about 3 to 4 weeks to lose a certain weight, and initially it's always water. So when I speak to a lady, I tell them that this is not a package. We're not on a package. We're not on a program. We're on a journey. We are in this together. You will not weigh yourself for a certain period of time. You will figure out why you are here. And as Dr. Nandita says, a food diary, an emotional diary, a mood diary really helps. So we probe into why she's here with me. I try to find answers, and sometimes I don't. When I don't have the answers, I don't feel guilty about it. I might pass it on to the next expert. There may be some other expert who's better at helping her out. So it has to be more than the weighing scales. It has to be more than the diets don't work. I've been here for 18 years. I have given up dieting on myself. I love my food. There's nothing wrong with eating. It has to be a balanced, wholesome food. You're from North, eat North Indian. You're from South, eat South Indian. Yes, having said that, certain meal patterns don't agree at a certain phase of life. That is where a doctor comes in, that is where a dietitian comes in, that is where a wellness coach comes in, where she figures it out that, okay, this is not working for you, and then that's where we take control of the clinical aspect. So we can't let go always. I always feel, if you're here, if you're qualified to be here, if there's a system in place, there's an Indian Dietetic Association in place, there's a reason for that. We've been given the norms. We subtly lay them out to the individual that, okay, these are the norms for you. The salt intake has to be this much. The sugar intake has to be minimum. It's okay to eat a lot more of raw vegetables produced. There's a system in place, but we don't impose it on anybody. The system is to make the journey of self-care, of self-love easy for the individual, especially women. We have to accept the fact that a lady who walks into your life, into your clinic, is going through a certain life cycle. It could be adolescence, it could be pregnancy. So you respect that, you acknowledge that, and the answers have to be modified in that certain way. I hope my conversation has been fruitful. I've been able to send out some message, and having said that, I would love to hear from Dr. Nandita and then Swarnima. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. So the takeaway message, I'm just conclude in 3 points. First point is, we have to stop talking as healthcare professionals when we meet anybody in our clinic, even outside clinic, because you're having an impact all the time. Even if you're in a social gathering, people are listening to you, they remember that you are a healthcare professional. So as a healthcare professional, stop talking about diet, weight loss, body image, any conversation around these three, and shift talking about bio-psycho-emotional health. I'm using this word due to lack of a better word here. A bio-psycho-emotional health, by which I mean biologically the physical markers. Of course, your sugars, fasting sugar should not be 140. So we do talk about the physical markers, the psychological marker, where so there's so many places where fat people are funny. People make jokes or at themselves, at others. And we know with every bout of laughter and with every joke, a part of them dies, a part of them cries, and they have a lonelier and a very quieter world inside, right? So the psychological issue and the emotional. So people who are obese, they usually don't sleep well, spend more time on the screen, they are more on social medias, and it's a vicious cycle. They feel worse about themselves and they keep on getting stuck. So for the lack of a better word right now, I'll do with a bio-psycho-emotional health. So we don't talk about diet, weight loss, body image issues. We talk about this in any way and always around this, so that we can dislodge. It's like a dislodge. You dislodge the food, weight, image from, and come to the real issue, which is, how do I feel about myself? who do I see when I see? And just work on this issue. That is number one. Number two, what Kavita said, that everyone has a right to comment on how you look. I remember when my daughter was in grade 12, she stopped visiting every family function because she's a MMA fighter. She stopped exercising and eating and studying because, again, our culture wants the 12th grade marks. Whatever as a parent you say, it doesn't help. Now, that made her gain weight, and anywhere she would go, people would say, oh, you've gained some weight. So she stopped visiting every family function. So everyone has a right to comment. That is one part of a culture. And as Swarnima said, lack of care around women. So in what Swarnima was saying, the invisibilization of women post-menopause, as if ab kya farak padta hai, versus the too much of gaze on girls as soon as they hit puberty. Okay, as if your whole culture is looking at a woman just from the reproduction point of view. You only matter between 13 and 50. Something like that. I mean, it's not said like that, but something, it's an undertone, as if you just matter for that. So, which is very primitive. I'm sure at one point that was all right, because that was the only thing which a primitive man, caveman, would be thinking of. But today we have come a long way from there, and still the primitive instincts keep hounding us. So, culture of lack of care around women, other than reproductive health care, and everyone has a comment, the social part, this culture has to move to a culture of kindness. A culture of kindness. Seeing, and I'm sure everybody has only one underlying issue: I'm not good enough. In some different ways. So just coming to that, dealing that is number two. And number three, the last and the most important part, that any woman who walks into the office of any healthcare professional, a job and a responsibility is to start a conversation about wellness with an intention. Now this word is very important, because whatever is your intention, that is how it will fall on the other person. So talk about wellness with an intention of empowering her, not correcting her. Okay, so I'm not doing it as a package program like Tina was saying. It's a empowerment so that you give a tool. It's like teaching somebody to cycle. You're not going to every day hold the cycle. You're going to just teach the person to swim, right? So empowering her so that she can deal with the right issue. Again, how do I feel about myself? What is it that I want to heal? That is the only issue we need to deal with, right? And each and every person in every woman's life is responsible to make her feel what she's feeling today, knowingly and unknowingly. It's not that the grandparents had any wrong and bad intention when they said, "Ki arey tu moti hoti ja rahi hoti, tu bahut kali hai." Nobody had any bad intention. Knowingly, unknowingly, everybody's responsible. So let's just talk to them about wellness in such a way so that we empower the client, the person, so that she deals with the real issue. How do I feel about myself? How do I heal? If this journey is started, it doesn't matter where you reach. Like Beena said, that today I'm eating and I'm happy, I'm in a happy spot. It doesn't matter if I'm not the size when I look at myself or I don't get into that particular dress. But if the journey is started, I think it's half won, more than half won, because you have to be on the journey, on the path. That is all that matters for every woman, to be on that journey, which is towards healing oneself. Thank you. Over to Swarnima.
Thank you. So I will just, since we're talking about takeaways, I will just perhaps speak in terms of 2 action items. There was a, research conducted in Germany across various universities among healthcare practitioners, and, about how equipped they feel to give care, provide healthcare and adequate healthcare to obese patients and overweight patients. And the result was that only 25% of those, people who were, surveyed, they felt that the current healthcare of obese patients is good or very good. Only 25% felt so. And over 63% of healthcare practitioners felt that they strongly and somewhat agreed that it has been difficult for them to get resources needed in order to care for obese patients. So I think the first is, like we said, healthcare practitioners are in a way our first line of defense. Whenever we feel ill or whatever it is, we go to a doctor, obviously. So I think, empowering and equipping doctors with not just, the technicalities of like health, so, in that sense, but also, like the latest research. What are the ways of doing it? I know that Foxy in India does, some kinds of things, and there are other ways in which doctors unionize and, upskill themselves, etc. So one is, that how because doctors are also working within a framework. It's very easy to hate on doctors and say that what, the medical fraternity stigmatizes this, blah blah. But the fact is that they are working within a framework, and that is very, very important to recognize. And so how can doctors as medical practitioners, like how can we equip and empower them with the right kind of resources, and how can doctors unionize to look at new evidences, look at new data, and sort of just have more newer approaches towards dealing with newer issues, for instance. The second thing is, which is on the patients and the women themselves and the people themselves who are seeking the healthcare. The thing is that, we have this tendency as a seeker of healthcare, that, we will go to various doctors and we will say, "Arey, ye achhe nahi the, wo achhe nahi the," etc. But I think in this day and age, it's extremely important for us to also seek out evidence-based information for our own research as well. It is not enough to just go on Google and do a little WebMD or something like that and say that, this is the reality or whatever. It is important for us to go a little deeper. When we're talking about diets, when we're talking about whatever, it is a responsibility as consumers, it is a responsibility as people and patients to also look at what evidence is there. You can't just say that, this new startup has said something, or that new digital influencer has said something, and because they have so many followers and they have a blue verified tick, so everything that they're saying is gospel truth. We have to really look at information building around diet, health, etc. So I would really, and the second part is actually very important, because a lot of people are looking for services. More and more people are looking for healthcare services, and what kind of healthcare services get the incentive is extremely important. What kind of behaviors, what kind of digital behaviors are we incentivizing with our information seeking behavior? We have to seek the right kind of information also. It's all there. In the internet, where there is misinformation, there is information also. Where there is myth, there is fact also. So we have to make that effort to really look at the evidence-based information, to really look at what kind of studies have been done by what kind of industry, and what kind of studies have been done by non-partisan bodies, and like really follow that. So I think these are the only two actionables I would mention from my end. And I think the third one, if I may just say so, is that people who are in the healthcare industry, they have to be very collaborative. We have seen in this space, like I work in the healthcare, women's healthcare space, and I see a lot of, there is a lack of collaboration between different kinds. Somebody like will talk about holistic healthcare, but they will ditch, doctors, which is a little strange for me, because I'm all for like a holistic approach to healthcare. Like I'm a person, I have some conditions also, and I go for holistic, but you cannot ditch the evidence-based, medical, science-based approaches as well, and vice versa. So there has to be a more collaborative effort, because the discourse of healthcare is a very wide one. The discourse of well-being, the discourse of, care, healthcare has two words. health and care. I know it's a large discourse. So I think there has to be a lot of collaboration. There has to be a lot of mutual learning. We have to exchange a lot of takeaways between ourselves. So I would say these are the 3 actionables from my perspective. And I hope that in future this empowers public health policy and public health systems in our country, which is really, really broken. So so thank you.